This is the Future Talent Podcast, a future-focused podcast series showing the channels that enterprise can engage today to empower their current employees and future-proof the talent pipeline of tomorrow. This series is brought to you by Technological University Dublin's Enterprise Academy. We create learning solutions to enable your business success. Want to find out how we can support your learning and development needs? Visit www.tudublin.ie/enterprise-academy to book in a call with our team.
Welcome back to the Future Talent Podcast. In this episode, we aim to demystify university accreditation. That is, to answer the question, how does a higher education qualification differ from the ever-growing pool of courses and content available online? You will hear how accredited programs encourages a move away from a content view of learning towards a more performative view of learning. By writing in learning outcomes into a module or program, by design, we are asking ourselves as educators from the outset, what is our learner actually going to be able to do or perform or demonstrate at the end of this learning? The episode opens up with Dr. Claire McAvinia, academic developer at TU Dublin, giving a brief overview of accredited education as it sits on the Irish National Qualifications Framework. Claire explains how any new programme needs to fit within this framework, with competencies or graduate attributes designed into the programme from the onset. Claire hands over to Dr. Colin Hughes, head of TU Dublin's Graduate Business School, who moderates this panel discussion. Each panellist speaks to their experience of designing programmes in collaboration with higher education and offers very valuable advice to organisations looking to do the same.
So what is accreditation? If we're demystifying, that's probably a good question to start with. And in Ireland, it looks a bit like this. So this visual would be very recognisable to many of you here. If you haven't seen it before, it's the National Framework of Qualifications represented on this fan diagram. And this can be found online at Quality and Qualifications Ireland, QQI's website. And you can probably see the junior cert and leaving cert there, which most of us would be familiar with. But at the right-hand side of the fan, where we have the square there, it's just showing where our programmes would tend to be in further and higher education, going from level 6 all the way through to level 10. So if in the morning we decided as a group here we were going to design a new accredited programme, we would have to engage with this framework and we would have to decide where on this framework our new programme was going to live, what level it was going to be at, in order to have our programme validated and recognised as an accredited programme of TU Dublin or of any of our institutions or our institutions in partnership with other people. And when we would get into the business end of things, we would be looking at these descriptors. Obviously, they're far too small to see on a slide like this today. It's just to make you aware of this. So these are level descriptors for all levels of that national framework. And you can maybe just about make out the headings that show the categories that we have here: knowledge, know-how and skill, and competence. And actually, competence accounts for the 4 rows at the end there, which is reflective of what we want to design into programmes, that we are thinking about graduate attributes, soft skills, we're thinking about sustainability, we're thinking about digital, so many of the themes that have already been articulated today. And now we have the micro-credentials coming along, this innovation in accredited design and in programme design. And we just have on the slide here a couple of the characteristics of micro-credentials and how we might define them. So these would include digital badges, industry or professional certification, massive open online courses or MOOCs, and university short courses. And ISCED have offered a definition on this and have suggested that we think of this kind of programme or this short, small volume of learning when we think of micro-credentials, and that we can certify and assess that learning, albeit in that short or small volume of learning. These can be standalone or they can be combined into larger credentials. They may form part of larger credentials. So we find our place on that framework, the national framework, through those routes. but owned by the learner, they can be shared and they are portable. And so we're looking at this flexible mode throughout the system, what's sometimes been called hyper-flexibility in the 21st century, but underpinned by quality assurance, looking at the agreed standards that we have in our relevant sectors or areas of activity and showcasing the learning achievements of the learner. So some nice examples here, and I'm very grateful to Colin for helping with this, because I work in a central team and we don't often see all of this work brought to fruition in some of the faculties and schools that we work with. So here we have, as he mentioned, accredited talent development. In other words, there is a collaboration between TU Dublin and a partner to bring about a programme, and we have some examples of partners we've worked with there. Or we have customised programmes. So in that case, we would manage and deliver them within TU Dublin, but with the expertise of partners coming into those programmes. So on the one hand, delivery by the partner, on the other hand, delivery by ourselves. And you can see the array of examples there. And presented here, if we think of our levels, the sample of programmes at different levels, and we can see all the way from level 6 and 7 through to level 9. And just to translate that briefly, level 6 and 7, we would see around CPD certificates and diplomas. Level 9 is taking us into the master's level. So you can see how that framework of qualifications is reflected here too. So accrediting programmes is important because it reflects the learning design that we were speaking about and hearing about earlier this morning, and particularly the definition of outcomes. So it's encouraging us to move away from a content view of learning and teaching and assessment towards a more performative view. What is our learner actually going to be able to do or to perform or to demonstrate at the end of the process of learning with us? And this term constructive alignment is often used around this space. So hence the visuals here. We have our rocket blasting off in the image at the top. Hopefully you can just about see that. If we want our learner to achieve that kind of project or that kind of outcome at the end of their learning, then we need to align with that in the learning outcomes that we set and the teaching and learning and assessment methods that we use. And a question we might ask ourselves, and we have to reflect on often here, is whether by working in a traditional transmission-oriented lecture setting and a traditional exam type assessment mode, we are going to get that outcome. So with constructive alignment, we want to do something different at those other stages in the teaching and learning and in the assessment to ensure that we get the outcome that we want. And that is founded on a lot of work over the recent decades in learning theories and in authentic learning, teaching and assessment practices. So hopefully by doing this and by looking for our constructive alignment, we're ensuring reflection, application for impact, and we're taking in the new challenges and the new innovations that are coming along so frequently in the world as we know it at this stage. So I'll leave it at that for the minute and I can pass back to you, Colin.
Thank you, Claire. So we thought that might be useful just to make sure we're all kind of speaking the same language. And I think Claire's last point talks to one of the key questions we receive when partners come to us. Well, what's the benefit of accreditation and so on? And I don't want to say forcing, but it encourages that deep level of reflection on the content and that application to practice. So I think that's really important. So we've a panel of 4 today, and I'm going to ask each person to introduce themselves when I ask them a question, because I think they'll do a better job of it than I will. So I want to pass to Jane Massy first. And Jane, you've significant experience in this space throughout a multitude of different roles on accredited talent development. And just I suppose an open question to you first. Why? What's the benefits? Why is accredited talent development important?
Thank you very much. Well, I should firstly introduce SGS. So these days I work for SGS Ireland. SGS employs about 97,000 people around the world. It's the world's largest testing, verification and inspection business. So if you imagine, for example, there's a standard, let's say ISO 14064 on greenhouse gas emissions, we verify the organizations that wish to demonstrate compliance. Or if there's a regulation, currently working with TU Dublin, for instance, on a program around probably the most complex regulation to come out of the Commission in the health sector in recent years, the medical device regulation. Sometimes audiences faint when they hear those words. And we are the people who are accredited to be able to certify whether there has been conformance to that. So that's what we do. We have labs where we test as well. Here in Ireland, we've just under 500 people. We have a pharmaceutical testing laboratory, we have a gas testing laboratory, and a whole range of different projects of different sectors, different areas of work. So for us, why is it possible? So I think I should briefly say two things. One is my role is to, at this hour of my life, is to support business strategy and help senior business leaders and functional managers in their strategies, their development. One of the things, I came into SGS 6 years ago because they bought my business. And so one of the things I have been doing is saying you have to, in the kind of business that we're in, and I'll explain why in a second, you have to engage with the higher education institutions. Part of our challenge, you take something like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, or you take something like the Medical Device Regulation. Achieving those standards or regulations is unbelievably challenging. We are talking, for us, around trying to find talent that is highly experienced in a particular area. So let's take medical devices. You need people from industry who've got years of experience in product development, regulatory, quality management, and then we're trying to take them and turn them into auditors according to one of the most complex regulations in the world. Finding talent these days, because this is a new regulation, there aren't people in the market. There are very, very few people in the labour market. So we need to look for talent today that we can develop as auditors, but we also need to be ensured there will be a pipeline of talent. That means coming to the likes of TU Dublin and saying, we need to work with you. We can take all our information. We can design a program, which we've done here. We can teach that program. But what we want to do is to see this having long-term impact. Therefore, it needs to be accredited at postgraduate level, because this is at that level. It needs to have credentials that people can actually assemble, coming back to EQF, the National Qualification Framework. People need to be able to accumulate. It needs to be something that can appeal to a global audience, because we obviously want to teach this. We're going to teach it. We're teaching it, already teaching it online, but we want people from all over, mainly all over Europe, to actually come on this program. Therefore, they need the credits, which they can then go to their university, whether it's Ghent or Bologna or whatever, and carry those credits under the EQF system, where you've got a mutual recognition process. So why is it important? Particularly for very highly skilled, in our case, very highly skilled, very high value areas. The only way we are going to be able to have a pipeline of those skills in the future is if we integrate it into the higher education system, so that there will be a long-term pipeline of people who have those skills. This is post, if you like, university. This is people for people in the workplace, people highly skilled already. So that's why it's of importance to us. I should say a couple of other things. I've worked as an evaluator for the European Commission. I have gone through this process of working with universities, accrediting, if you like, workplace training and learning and development. I've done it before. So for me, not only was it a pleasure to get the welcome I got from TU Dublin, but I realized I was coming to it with a wealth of experience. I should say, for those in enterprises who haven't done this, you will find a great welcome, you'll find lots of help, but there is a lot to learn. You need to understand how the systems work. Ultimately, it comes back to clarity about learning objectives. Is it What is it exactly you really need people to learn? How will those be assessed? Understand that then that's the starting point. And that isn't necessarily all that easy.
Yeah. Okay. And we have great debates when we're working with partners around what those outcomes should be.
Yes.
To make sure we get them to a stage that they're measurable, so that we know ultimately what the results look like and how we get them there with what type of content and so on. So, Jane, thanks for that. Gareth, your experience, a large amount of it is in the culture and creative industries. You might just give us a little bit of a background, and including your background on accreditation within that sector.
Sure. Thanks, Colin, and good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite. I just say I agree with all of what you said there, particularly the bit about clarity at the end. So by way of introduction, I'm Gareth Lee. I'm the manager of Cultural and Creative Industries Skillnet, which is a Skillnet network. For those of you unfamiliar with the Skillnet model, Skillnet Ireland is essentially a government agency that's responsible for workforce and talent development, funded by DFERS. There are over 70 different Skillnet networks in Ireland. Some are based regionally and many are sectoral networks. Ours is a sectoral network focused on the cultural and creative industries. It's a new network, just launched in May by Minister Simon Harris. But it's actually also a consolidation and an amalgamation of 3 networks that previously existed: Animation Skillnet, Screen Skillnet, and Immersive Technology Skillnet. So through those 3 Skillnets, they've been supporting the creative industries for over 10 years through talent development programs and so on, some certified, some not certified. And essentially the kind of, I suppose, the key aspects of the Skillnet model is that it's industry facing, it's demand driven, it's responsive, it's flexible, and it's regarded for quality as well. Before joining Culture and Creative Industries Skillnet, I worked for 5 years with Screen Ireland, which is the government agency that supports the film, TV and animation sector in Ireland. And I led the team there as head of skills and professional development to deliver hundreds of CPD programs, some certified, some uncertified. And then before that, I worked at Ballyfermot College for 15 years, developing and delivering programs at level 5, level 6, level 8 with a variety of partners, including DCU and University of Dundee and others as well. I was also involved with TU Dublin in the development of the first Creative Industries Apprenticeship, one of the new apprenticeships at level 8 in CGI Technical Art, which was an interesting experience. And I'm currently working with IEDT, Kildare Wicklow ETB and City of Dublin ETB on the new kind of national tertiary programmes, one of those which will be launched later this summer, which again is about aligning FE and HE more closely together. So I suppose my track record is working closely with industry, working closely with different academic institutions to try and deliver programs of quality. Sometimes they are certified, as I said, sometimes uncertified. In terms of the creative industries and certification, it's an interesting one. There's certainly a narrative out there in the creative industries that certification isn't important. I think it's important to say that. But equally, there's narratives out there in the creative industries around, there's sometimes issues around access, like how do I get into this industry? And just, I would say that the creative industries are maybe not as diverse and inclusive as they should be because it's not so obvious how you maybe get in. You also get issues around progression, like how do I move up in this industry? How do I go from a junior role to a senior role? You also hear people say things like, I've worked in this industry for 20 years and I don't have a certificate to show for it. So, on the flip side, there is a need and a demand for certification in the creative industries. There's certainly a demand. As I said, I've been involved in hundreds of CPD programs over the years. We've always had heavy demand for those programs, heavy interest. What I would say is that the demand tends to be for programs that are of quality. Time constraints is a significant issue for those involved in the creative industries. And it very much is an industry like many others where learning on the job is a really, really significant thing. So what I would say is there's definitely opportunity and demand for certification. It certainly has a value, but I think the areas that I see of most interest currently would be things like micro-credentials, which were mentioned, so shorter duration, addressing kind of significant needs of the moment and so on. I think RPL is an interesting area for the creative industries, given that people work in the industry without certification. So there's possibly, and I know we're working with, or I have been working with TU Dublin in the past on an RPL that could work for the creative industries. And then just work-based learning was interesting. What you were saying about evaluation and certification of work-based learning. I think we need to find robust but flexible models. A QA model, for work-based learning within the creative industries, and that's an area I'm really interested in. So, yeah, I suppose that's my experience.
Yeah, great. And RPL, probably we use this terminology, recognition of prior learning and understanding like what people bring with them when they enter into a program of study, so that we can give that its due recognition and so on. Gareth, just to stay with you for a second. So, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience in designing kind of accredited programs, working with different higher education institutions? What's that been like? Are there challenges?
Sure, and there are people in the room who I've worked with, so I have to be very positive in what I say, I guess. But so being involved in the creative industry, I'm going to use the rule of three and talk about three things. So for me, and look, by the way, it's just a caveat that percent. There are many facets of why things work well and don't work well. But just in terms of three, I think first and foremostly, it's really important to have the right people in the room when you're working with industry and academia to develop certified programs. And what I mean by that is, potentially that means, because I think there needs to be a lot of give from both sides. But I think that potentially means having someone in the room who can sign off on something. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Having someone in the room who maybe is a subject matter expert, obviously, or someone in the room who can champion things along. So I think champions on all sides is really, really critical. And where I've seen success, it's where there's that buy-in and that kind of, people are invested in it and willing to give their all to it. So that's really important, and the right people, I should say. The second thing would be, I think, flexibility. I've been in many rooms where industry and HE are talking, and it seems like they're talking different languages, and sometimes there's a lack of flexibility there that frustrates on both sides, like trying to shoehorn things into academic calendars or whatever it might be, or work placements can only happen at this time in the academic year. Industry just doesn't respond necessarily well to that kind of restriction, I guess. So a little bit of flexibility on both sides, I think, is really, really useful and tends to bear success. And then thirdly, I'm going to reuse your word, which is clarity. I think it's really, really important that everyone's really clear about what they want from something. I've been in situations where it wasn't and it failed, and I've been in situations where it was clear and there was success. So whatever industry can bring to the table in terms of this is what we actually need, that really helps HE, I think, and that same kind of clarity from the other side is really useful as well. So one of the things we did while I worked at Screen Ireland was we developed a competency framework. We worked with industry to develop it. So people involved in crew guilds basically helped to develop this competency framework. It was guided by HE and experts in the field as well. And we developed a competency framework for crew roles, for I think it's over 80 roles across 17 different departments. So skills, competencies, knowledge for all of those roles. And it's just been a great resource, essentially, to develop new programs, CPD programs, but also to look at things like RPL, which I mentioned, which is an ongoing piece of work. But that's something that industry were able to do to bring clarity to the table and really help things along. So yeah, so my experience, I suppose, is I think where both sides come together and there's that level of flexibility and clarity, things work really, really well. And just to call it one program with TU Dublin, because I'm in TU Dublin, we developed an advanced producing program with TU Dublin a few years ago, Springboard Plus program. I'm gone again, but I'll keep talking. Springboard Plus program, level 9, a really good example of industry and education coming together. Strong industry input, strong academic quality assurance. My colleagues in the room, Hugh McAvinia and Neil Murphy are here, who worked on the programme, just to call them out, and still work on the programme, I should say. But it's been running for a few years now. It's already had a lot of success with graduates of the programme achieving great things. But it's just, and it's like all programmes, there are ongoing challenges and problems to resolve. But it's a good example of a programme where industry and HE have come together and it's working really, really well.
I love those 3 points, actually, because of someone that sits on the other side of the desk and working with partners to design programmes. They are some of the crucial things, making sure that the right people are in the room and you don't have someone coming in from a more senior place or from a head office and saying, oh, hold on a second, have you not included X, Y, or Z? And that clarity as well around what we're trying to achieve together, I think is so important. Okay, thanks for that, Gareth. Claudia, So we heard a little bit about micro-credentials, and Claire kicked off and kind of talking about micro-credentials. We're in this area of rapid change and, very much focus on skills and what we're doing in terms of getting people prepared for uncertain futures in many cases. And the answer to that, or one of the answers that is kind of being proposed is micro-credentials. So the question I have is, what's the role of micro-credentials going forward? And secondly, are the larger programs dead? Or do they still have a place?
So I think starting from the micro-credentials, and it's lovely to be here. I was in TU Dublin 10 years ago. I used to work here. It was then DIT. So I haven't actually got to attend an event in Grange Government, so this is great to be here. I currently work with PayPal, and I have oversight of the governance of the learning technology platforms, products, and general learning infrastructure used to scale learning. This means getting involved in learning experiences from the inception, so that you're not just coming with a fully designed program and saying, hey, can we put this up on a system somewhere? Or how can we get this to 30,000 employees in 2 months? Right, we start that conversation from the very beginning. And as we have those conversations, many times when we are unpacking around skills, there's that thing around how quickly you need to get the skills in place. And one of the things you mentioned there was flexibility, and then the clarity as well, that comes in as well. I think from the very beginning, if there's that clarity, we can then start to have the conversation around how it would happen. And then things like micro-credentials can come in then as solutions to meeting those skill needs. But oftentimes what happens is people might go out, might recognize the skill gap themselves, and then engage in, go searching and all of that, and usually they find programs from learning platforms. LinkedIn was here earlier on in the day, and the other, alternatives out there. And they do those, but I think that's where we need to make a distinction around, knowledge. And, Jane earlier on mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. And, when you talk about knowledge, yes, you can get that learning, or you can get access to the content, complete an online course. But what the accreditation gives you is almost a validation of what you've done because of those authentic assessments, right? And so what that gives you is that if you do this micro-credential, you're able to, present yourself back to the organization and say, okay, yes, I am skilled in XYZ area because I worked on XYZ project and got assessed in XYZ way, right? If I think about myself, I was on a program that has been mentioned before, the product management course, but I'm not a product manager, right? I wanted to adopt product management practices in the area I was in, which meant I could not just take what I learned on the online, from the online learning platforms. I needed to be able to unpack it, to apply it in a different context. And so attending the product management diploma, I wished it had been shorter, but it was a diploma, gave me what I needed, right? I think if we have micro-credentials that meet those kinds of needs, and people can kind of dip in, get what they need, and then go out. And if they want to build that up into a broader program and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, because we have had a lot of talk around skills and short courses and so on. And we find that some people will come to us and say, I have a realised skill need, and it's a short probably skill gap that I can kind of fill. But then other people say, no, I kind of need something more holistic end to end. If I'm doing a more intensive leadership program, I need that depth and that level of reflection and time to learn from peers and so on. So it's really that balance of short and medium and long-term programs that will provide that level of development that people need. So it's a really interesting space at the moment when we talk to partners for their talent development in organizations that they're moving from right across the levels and right across different kind of durations for programs and different levels of depth and so on. So it's fascinating. And to thank Claire and her team, because they do a lot of that work with us in terms of helping us to design programs and make sure that we're creating that alignment that's needed to have that high level of quality and best practice.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. I really enjoyed hearing industry's perspectives and experiences of engaging with higher education. And I agree with Jane Massy's recommendation for organisations to collaborate with higher education today to ensure there is the right talent in the pipeline for tomorrow. I think Claudia's distinction between having access to knowledge content versus earning accredited learning helped to understand the value of higher ed learning, particularly, as Claudia highlighted, doing authentic assessments where learners can say, I'm skilled in XYZ because I worked on XYZ programme and got assessed in XYZ project. And to finish up, I will borrow Gareth's rule of 3 for designing programmes with higher education. 1, have the right people in the room. Don't have key decision makers coming in at the last hour. 2, the need for flexibility on both sides, with industry and higher education needing to speak the same language and be flexible with one another. And finally, 3, clarity. This is really important. Both parties need to be really clear what they actually need to get from the learning. This is great advice for anyone embarking on their accredited talent development journey. Thank you, Gareth, for the neat summary. Until next time, thank you for listening.